All right, are we online? All right, thank you, Kim. Welcome to the Senate Agriculture, State and Public Lands and Water Resources Committee, Thursday, February 22nd. We'll call the meeting to order. Kim, would you please call the roll?
Senator French,
Here.
Senator Hicks,
Excused?
Senator Ide,
Here.
Senator Cole,
Excused.
Senator Larson,
Here.
Chairman Steinmetz.
Thank you, Kim. I'm here. All right, we do have a quorum, so we'll go ahead and get started today. The first bill for our consideration is actually a House bill, so crossover has occurred, and that would be grace period state land lease renewals. If you recall, committee, in the interim, we took this up as a way to provide some additional flexibility to the Director of State Lands and Investments. And we gave a 30-day grace period. Basically, the content of the bill is found on page 2, which says, "For good cause shown, and at the written request of the current lessee, the director shall grant a current lessee 30 additional days past the expiration date of their existing lease to submit an application to renew." That's basically the gist of the bill, and I'm sure we all recall it now. So with that, I would bring up the state lands representatives today and just let them comment on the bill. Good morning, welcome.
Good morning, Madam Chairman. I'm Jennifer Scoggin. I'm the Director for the Office of State Lands and Investments. With me is Deputy Director Jason Crowder. Thank you, Madam Chairman and Committee, for your time today and allowing us to testify on House Bill 10. We do have a couple of proposed improvements, mainly because we're looking for a little clarity on how to implement this process. Yes, we appreciate the discretion to the director for those times, unexpected times when things occur and things don't always line up properly. But given our existing process with cure period and all of that, we're just looking for some timing clarification. So with that, Madam Chairman, I would yield to Deputy Director Crowder to kind of to walk you through our proposed changes, but also some of the existing process and how this would implement that.
All right, thank you for that. And Jason, will you be using this sheet that you
Yes, ma'am.
passed out?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, so has everybody got your sheet from State Lands and Investments? All right, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. We have talked at length about the grazing renewal process for a few years now with the Joint Ag Committee and this committee specifically as well. What I handed out is something that is familiar to you all, which is the timeline for the renewal process. What is enclosed in the timeline is what the legislature did back in 2023 through House Bill 22, which was change some of the due dates for applications to be submitted, change some of the ways the office approaches the lessees if they are missing that deadline or if they have a deficient application, and the response period for that. I really just provide that to you for information as we talk about a new addition to this, which is the grace period in the proposed bill today. As you can see, throughout the renewal process, the legislature has asked that the office approach the lessee 3 separate times. And each one of those times, or at least 2 of those times, is by certified mail and 1 is by phone call or email. That process, if the lessee doesn't respond to any of it, will expire just 10 days prior to the expiration date of the lease. And that's what you see on the timeline. That's the final due date for a renewal application. What the proposed bill does, it would be to extend that past that final 10 days and into 30 days past the expiration date of the lease. As you recall, in the interim, we mentioned that we might have a constitutional problem or an issue with this bill going past the allotted 10 years. We've approached the AG's office and had great conversations with them, lengthy conversations, and they believe that the bill as written probably doesn't present a constitutional problem, which is good. What they said was, as long as the lease isn't extended past that 10 years, we're probably okay. And what the bill does is allow an application to be submitted after the 10 years. But the lease actually does and would stop at that 10-year point or the expiration date of the lease. Practically on the ground, it's logical that the lessees would feel they still have access to that land if they hadn't submitted their application before the expiration date of the lease. But functionally, as the bill's written, and I guess legally, which is a bar above what I can attain, they say that that's not a constitutional problem. So I just wanted to present that for your information. However, we have provided you with an amendment, proposed amendment today that would try to honor that expiration date as much as possible so that there is some clear line in the sand that the lease is for a 10-year period, and that has a very definite end date, and that is the anniversary date. And we'd ask that to honor that, we would have a request from the lessee before that expiration date. And I believe the amendment says 5 days before the expiration date, the request would be had. And then there would be another 10 days after that that the applicant could submit their application. So those would be the two changes timing-wise that the amendment tries to address. One is recognition that we've already approached the lessee 3 times, either by phone, email, or certified mail. They've had an opportunity to respond, and if they didn't, they have one more chance through this bill before the expiration date to ask the director for an extension of time. We also believe that if they've made that attempt to address the director or send a request into the director, that they have lease renewal on their mind, that they have the application in front of them, because likely we've sent them a replacement, and that they could immediately turn that around as close to the expiration date as possible. So having 30 days in there, we feel may be a little bit lengthy, and people may take advantage of that full 30 days and then miss it again, forget about it again. And we don't want them to do that. We want them to submit their application when it's top of mind for them. The other change that the proposed amendment we've provided you does is provide the rulemaking authority by the board to define good cause shown. Obviously, that's a little bit difficult for us to manage without a good definition. It's somewhat arbitrary. So we would like to, in rule, define what good cause is. If they simply didn't want to submit their application, that's likely not a good cause. But if they had a medical emergency or a death in the family, that would be a good cause. And we just want to make sure that's defined and that the applicants and the lessees understand what that is. And they have the same expectation that we do. Madam Chairman, that's my comments for the bill and an explanation of the proposed amendment. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
All right, questions, committee? Any questions? Go ahead, Senator Ide.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Excuse me. On that last part, thank you, Director and Deputy Director. As defined by the board, you mentioned that, is there some rulemaking that is in place right now as defined by the board? That's my question. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Madam Chair, Senator Ide, in statute, there are a few places where the legislature has said that the board needs to make a determination or a definition within their rules for the process to move forward. So this would be similar in that vein. For having it defined good cause shown, it hasn't done that yet.
All right, any further questions, Senator French?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Director or Deputy Director, on line 1 there, after C for good cause shown, but you mentioned that. How do we define that, or can that be left up to your, maybe discretion isn't the word, but your ability to know what, like you mentioned a couple different things, if the reasons I need to fly to Vegas and gamble for a couple days, I'm sure that's not good cause shown. So is that something that can be left up to you guys to make that determination? Or I don't know how we define every instance. It's almost impossible, I think. Thank you.
Madam
ahead.
Chairman, Senator French, I agree. It's going to be hard to find every situation. Our rulemaking process is a public one. And so we would, before offering draft rules, work with the industries that are impacted, the Wyoming Stock Growers Association and others, to see if they have thoughts and ideas to make sure we don't leave anybody out, and then offer that to the public for public comment. And if we've missed something, they can offer that to us and to the board as well for final adoption. It is a definition that we probably don't want to pinpoint just by ourselves without inclusion of others.
Any further questions? Seeing none, we will go to public comment. Oh, you have one more? Go ahead, Dan.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. If we left that out, what process do you think you'd go through?
Madam Chairman, Senator Larson, I think it's a little difficult, being the director, making recommendations to the board, because ultimately the board would, determine whether we did something improper. But we don't want to be arbitrary and capricious. We want to have enough leeway to handle those situations that the board believes, would warrant good cause for that extension. But importantly, I think Deputy Director makes a good point that we also would like to hear from stock growers and others who would be impacted by this to see what their feelings are with respect to what would be good cause. Because we, like I said, we want to be consistent. We don't want to be arbitrary. Yes, certainly I could apply what I thought would be good cause shown, but I think we would prefer to have a few sideboards on it and in consultation with the others who would be impacted by it.
Any further questions? All right. Oh, go ahead, Senator French.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Real quick, on that issue, can you get direction from the Attorney General's office that kind of defines that? Our experience for good cause shown is defined as ABC. I don't know.
Go ahead.
Madam Chairman, Senator French, certainly we could consult with the Attorney General's office and we could formulate a policy within the agency without necessarily having to go through the rulemaking process. But I think we would want, as I mentioned, the folks who would want to perhaps utilize or invoke this to understand what the board or what in the process we would all consider to be good cause shown. So yes, we could do a policy in consultation with the Attorney General's office. We were just looking for input, I think, from others so that we're not operating in a vacuum.
All right. Thank you. Thank you. If we're finished here, we'll go to public comment. Is there any public comment on this bill? Mr. Magagna, come on down. Stick around. We might have questions when we work the bill.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Jim McGaggan with the Wyoming Stock Growers Association. You're, as a committee, well aware that we support this bill, so I will focus on the proposed amendment as I understand them as they were being presented to you this morning. As to the second part of the amendment, we would welcome the board being involved in rulemaking on this, because that does provide us and others with the opportunity to engage in what those rules should look like. And I certainly understand the reluctance of the director to be put in a position that she alone defines what's good cause. And I think some guidance to the director on that basis makes a lot of sense. Regarding the timeframes that have been suggested, I do have some concern now. I don't see this provision as being used, but very seldom. With the other process that you've put in place for notice, the second notice, this would be a rare circumstance when this happens. But the requirement that you have to request this before the expiration of the lease is of some concern. I think that the desperation would lead you to request this exemption would come when you suddenly realized that you'd missed that date. And so I would suggest, perhaps for your consideration, that rather than saying you have to apply for this 5 days before the expiration of the lease, perhaps saying that you have to apply for this within 10 days following the expiration of the lease, and then maintain the other language as provided by the office that once you've done that, you have an additional 10 days to actually submit your application. But so that both of those events would occur following the expiration, not one of them occurring prior to the expiration. With that, Madam Chair, I'd be happy to address any questions.
Questions? Senator Ide.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I like those, sorry, Mr. Magagna. I like those suggestions that you mentioned there as well. Usually 5 days before, you don't really recognize you missed the boat until the boat's already sailed. So, but yeah, grace period and then another grace period, you know, sort of the way you explained it right there, I think sounds like good language. I like that better, actually. Thank you, Madam Chair.
All
Thank you,
right,
Senator
thank
Ide.
you.
And I certainly understand, we don't want to leave this wide open, so you can come in 6 months later and say, oh, I didn't do it, give me another 30 days. I think you've got, as lessees, we have some responsibilities, but if the intent of this is to help someone who missed their deadline, then I think they need to have some days after that deadline in order to submit their request for this leniency.
All right, okay. Any further questions? Seeing none,
Thank you.
thank you very much. Any further testimony on this bill? Welcome, come on down.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Brett Moline, Wyoming Farm Bureau Federation. You know, the whole goal of this bill is to keep these lands leased. And we've had some issues where all of a sudden we had a lot of things that weren't being leased. We had a lot of vacant leases, and there was a lot of reasons for them, and it was on both sides. I like the time frame that's listed here. You have to do it within 30 days after the lease is expired. And I don't mind putting it into rules. One thing about what is an extenuating circumstance, one thing about rules is they can be a little more fluid than statutes. That if we do need to change, you know, some items come up that we didn't think of when we did it in rules, we can do that in a relatively short time frame. To change statutes takes typically a couple of years. So okay with changing the, allowing some rules to be written on this to narrow the sideboards, because if they're not narrowed, that makes it where for one person it would be acceptable, for another person it would not be acceptable, especially when you would change directors, which we have to look at. We're not always going to have the same director forever, so putting some guidance together is not a bad idea. With that, Madam Chairman, I would sit for any questions you or the committee may have.
Questions? Questions? Seeing, Senator Ide.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just make sure I understand you clearly. So it's essentially, you're for the language of the 30 days period that's in the existing bill right now. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Madam Chair, Senator Ide, it seems to be just a little more cut and dried, straightforward. We don't have the extra time period. This is, you got to do it at this time. And I think as the holder of the lease, you've got some obligations to get her done. And there's going to be some times when you can't, some extenuating circumstances that we can deal with in rules, but and I do agree with the previous speaker. I don't think this is going to be used very often, but those times where it's needed, I think this time frame works quite well.
All right. Any further questions? Seeing none?
Thank you.
Thank you very much. One more, come on down. Welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Keith Kennedy for the Wyoming Wool Growers. We would support either of the positions that you just heard, but we believe that the point of this was to actually have at least a small period of time after the expiration of the lease where for good cause shown. And I would add to that, not being an attorney, that I'm reading now from Black's Law Dictionary, what constitutes a good cause is usually determined on a case-by-case basis and is thus relative. And so I would encourage that we would like to see rules, but I think they do need to be flexible because we cannot imagine what particular circumstance might occur. An illness, a death in the family, those sort of things. And so I think yes, there does need to be rules, but they can't foresee every possible circumstance, which admittedly would be quite rare. With that, I'd welcome your questions.
Questions for Mr. Kennedy? Thank you, Mr. Kennedy, because I was trying to look that up on my phone and I don't have enough internet. So thank you for looking that up. I was thinking exactly the same thing. All right. Any further public comment on this bill? Further public comment? Anyone online, Kim?
No, Madam Chairman, no one's online.
Thank you very much. Okay, public comment is closed. Committee, what's your pleasure on the bill?
I'll move the bill.
Moved by French, Senator Larson seconds. Committee amendments on the bill. I'm gonna be honest right now, I really don't. The whole purpose of this bill was to give flexibility. And so to really start now nailing it down with 5 days before and this and that and the other thing is not quite what I thought we were doing, but go ahead, Senator Larson.
Madam Chairwoman, I would make an amendment, just page 2, line 1, and that's all,
Page
as defined by the board.
as defined by the board. Okay, do I have a second on that? Seeing no second, motion dies for lack of a second. Any further amendments on the bill? Further amendments on the bill? Any discussion on the bill? Seeing none, Kim, would you please call the roll?
House Bill 10. Do pass. Senator French.
Aye.
Senator Hicks.
Excused.
Senator Ide.
Aye.
Senator Kolb excused. Senator Larson.
Aye.
Chairman Steinmetz.
Aye. And Kim, let's leave that open for Senators Hicks and Cole, please.
Thank you.
The next bill for our consideration is House Bill 11, State Land Lease Amendments. This, I believe, was the one where we made the certified postmark date, the date of receipt of the lease. And then we were working on the payment that is acceptable to the director, so they could pay, you know, in any variety of ways that the office is able to take payments. With that, I would call up the state office again, the agency.
Madam Chairman, again, Jennifer Scoggin, Director, Office of State Lands and Investments, with me, Jason Crowder, Deputy Director. So this bill, we appreciate the clarification of the filing being deemed filed on the date of the postmark. I think that's going to clear up a lot for people, and it makes it
Good.
a little bit easier for us. I think, you know, sometimes things get stuck in central mail, and so I think this just clarifies all of that. With respect to the payment, I'm going to defer to Deputy Director Crowder. He's been more involved in the discussions on this, and particularly what your counterparts have said on the House side.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As we discussed in the interim, this is the only place in statute where the very prescriptive types of payments that can be accepted for applications is highlighted like this. Everywhere else, it just says, please pay your bill. In this situation, it says by check, by cash, by all of those very specific things. And one of the requests we made over the interim was to open that up a little bit, give us some flexibility as we move into 2024 and beyond and start opening the ability to accept electronic payments. That specifically was not identified within the prescriptive types of payments accepted. So we appreciate that flexibility. One thing on the House side that we discussed was reinserting the words acceptable to the director. As you're aware, in the interim, we talked about having the requirement to accept all sorts of different types of payments that the state of Wyoming by itself may not be ready to accept. From gold, other precious metals, all the way down to possible livestock and things like that. So what we'd asked the House to do, and they agreed, was to insert back in acceptable to the director, because we simply need the ability to provide money to the state of Wyoming. It's ready to accept, and it's not ready to accept gold as a payment now. And we have a lot of administrative problems in the office. If somebody brought a sack full of gold in to pay for their lease, we wouldn't know how to value it, we wouldn't know how to store it, we wouldn't know how to securely move it around, things like that. But when the state of Wyoming is prepared for that type of payment structure, acceptable to the director allows that to occur at that time. So we appreciated the work that they did there. Happy to answer any questions after that.
Questions? Questions? Seeing none, we've got a pretty easy day for you today. Thank you very much for being here. Oh, Senator Ide.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just thanks for the plug on the gold. Anyway, Deputy Director.
We're moving in the right direction. All right. Come on down, Farm Bureau, and we'll open public comment.
Madam Chair, Committee, Brett Mulligan, Wyoming Farm Bureau Federation. I wish I would have thought of this earlier. So I hate kind of muddying the water on the second side, but should the state of Wyoming start accepting other types of payments of yaks, goats, gold, silver, et cetera, being a little facetious, but right now, that red language is payment acceptable to the director. And it's not a big deal, but instead of saying director, should we say the state of Wyoming? And so that if we do come up with some other methods of payments, that we don't have to come back to this part and say, well, it's up to the director rather than the state. And I think this would take some burden off the director. If the state accepts it, the state lands accepts it. Not a big deal, but just, again, I apologize for having this thought this morning instead of when it was over on the other side. With that, Madam Chair, I would sit for any questions. Fine with how it is,
Yeah,
but as a thought.
just a comment. As we were working through this legislation, the reason it says that is just to be consistent with all how statute deals with the office in
Yes.
other areas. So that's the only reason it is that way, just to keep statute consistent. Go ahead, Senator French.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Thanks for the input, but I don't think it's necessary, because from 12 down is talking about the director and a person applying, they have a filing fee, payment acceptable, God, I can't talk, acceptable to the director. I just don't feel it's necessary, but thank you.
Thank you, Senator French. Thank you.
Point well
Mr.
taken,
Moline.
committee. Thank you for the time.
All right, is there any further public comment on this bill? Anyone else want to get your exercise and come to the front?
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and we fully support this bill with the amendment that was put on in the Senate with the discretion for the director. On a personal note, I have to express my disappointment because I had been envisioning in my mind for next spring, the next time that my state land lease renewals are due, that I would be driving to Shan with a few head of lambs in the back of my pickup to deliver to the Office of State Lands, but I guess that won't, unless I can convince the director that that's acceptable method of payment, I may not be doing that. But we're fine with the bill, Madam Chairman.
All right, thank you. So you're saying there's a chance then?
I won't give up trying.
All right, thank you, Mr. Magagna. Thank you for the levity. All right, any other further public comment on this good little bill? Anyone online, Kim?
No, Madam Chairman, no one's online.
All right, seeing no one in the room and no one online, public comment is closed. Committee, what's your pleasure on the bill? Moved by Ide, seconded by French. Any discussion on the bill? Discussion on the bill, seeing none. Kim, would you please call the roll?
House Bill 11 engrossed. Senator French.
Aye.
Senator Hicks excused. Senator Ide.
Here.
You need to vote aye.
Oh, I'm sorry. Aye. I was playing with my butt.
Senator Kolb excused. Senator Larson.
Aye.
Chairman Steinmetz.
Aye.
4 ayes, 2 excused.
All right, and we'll keep that vote open for our absent members. Okay, with that, our committee is adjourned. Thank you.